I'd like now to introduce another person who needs no introduction. I often tell people this is the man who started at Yahoo when you never heard of Yahoo and took them to the place to when you couldn't remember when you never heard of Yahoo. He was chief marketing officer during that period of time. He wrote the book, Love is the Killer App, The Likeability Factor, Saving the World at Work, and, you know, the most recent and the most fun, Today We Are Rich. He is doing some most amazing things online right now, and I'm going to let him talk. His name is Tim Sanders.
Thank you. You are a gem, Liz, and I'm going to speak slower now than I usually do. Gosh, it's so good to see all of you. It really is. I mean, such a good mark. I finally get to meet Stephen. I get to meet you. Get my picture taken with you. I have to get that. Great. I always leave a room right before I give a talk to walk outside and say my mantra as a speaker. I discovered, or I should better say detected it, about a decade ago when I read a book by author Nick Morgan. Nick Morgan is known for publicwords.com. He's one of the greatest speechwriters, I believe, in the world today. In the book, Working the Room, Morgan says the only reason to give a speech is to change the world. And when he coaches people, he says you must subscribe to this philosophy because otherwise you're just talking. I was at a gig yesterday, and I won't say who it was with, but he's very expensive as a speaker. And someone asked him why he was there, because the event was more or less a philanthropic type event. And he said, I'm here for 40 grand, literally, backstage. And what really struck me was that we all have a purpose when we do everything. It's merely a question of how high it is. Some people have a very base purpose. I'm here for the money, okay? But they still have a purpose. Let's not kid ourselves. There is a why behind the what. It's just base. And then there are people that say, I'm here to change the world. And they have a higher purpose. And this is what I want to talk about today. I don't want to just talk about you finding your mission, which I want you to, from this day forward, to call it your purpose. And I'll explain why in a minute. I want you to find one that's worthy of success. I want you to challenge yourself to detect a higher purpose based on some of the exercises we're going to go through in the next half hour. Because when you elevate your purpose, it changes everything in your life, from your internal motivations to your external behavior. I'll give you an example from my own personal life. I was working at Discovery Channel. It's 1997. I read an article about this freakish-looking guy in Dallas, Texas that's got a startup called AudioNet. And what was so interesting about the article is that he was audio streaming basketball games. He was making money on pay-per-listen for Worldwide Wrestling. Just stop and think about that for a second. Pay-per-listen, Worldwide Wrestling. And he was just starting to stream video. At the time, my sales team was in charge of overnight broadcast advertising. Discovery Channel was one of the only networks at the time that didn't do infomercial paper inquiry. They actually had original programming on at 4 in the morning. The problem was it had as many viewers as the Oprah Winfrey Network when Oprah's not on it. I mean, I'm literally talking about this many. And we were not doing very well for our advertisers. So when I read that Cuban was streaming video, I said, I got to go meet with this guy because we can put, it was a vision, it was a misguided vision. We can put all of our overnight programs on the internet and they'll always be prime time. Made sense, right? So when I got there, I'm talking to him about this, And he starts to talk to me about how the internet is going to create two things that will change the world forever: transparency and access. He says every tyrannical government is toppled by transparency and access. And it hit me. The telephone wires, the telegraph wires, they've gone up. If you've read Love is the Killer app, I tell this story that when I was raised on the farm, my grandmother, Billy, always told me about these relatives that we had in Oklahoma. They were soap sales scoundrels, she would say. Their shtick is they would roll into a city in Oklahoma or North Texas, and they had a little show. They do it on the back of a wagon about this miracle soap that does all these wonderful things. They'd sell a bunch of bottles, and they'd ride out of town before people figured out it didn't work. And I said, well, whatever happened to the Greens? I've never met them. She says, they were thrown in jail. I go, really, what happened? She goes, the telegraph wires went up. And they were waiting for them in Maud, Oklahoma. And I never forgot that story. So when I met Cuban, and I realized the telegraph wires were literally going up with the internet, I quit my job. I sat on a stack of phone books for a $12,000 a month salary, and I participated in the revolution with gusto and with purpose. And that's why I wanted to go to Yahoo when broadcast.com sold to them, and half of all the broadcast folks quit. Because they didn't want to be controlled. They didn't want to move to California. I was like, no, we are taking the revolution to the next level, because as I understood it, Jerry and David created Yahoo to help people find anything, communicate with anyone, and buy anything. The way that you would hear David Philo say is it was like Walton's vision for democratizing shopping to the next level. And I really prescribed to that, and that's where I got all my energy. So I get to Yahoo. It is March 2000. By the way, a historical reference, March 2000 is like October 2008. I got there just in time. I literally got there, bought a home that was overpriced, 50 miles away from Yahoo, and everything cratered. And people would come to work every day with that deer in the headlines look, wouldn't they? But we stayed on purpose. And then we heard about this company. Like a year later, a vendor that had decided to compete against us because they thought we lost our way. And we heard about their purpose. And their purpose was more audacious than just Jerry and David's, let's organize the web so we can find sumo wrestling or golf tips. These two brats said, we're going to organize all the world's information. And one of their engineers says, and along the way, we won't be evil. And they got all the great talent, even before they took 50% of our market share. 3 years before they went public. Back in the day when why would you leave Yahoo to go to Google, the answer is simple. Because Google was fighting with a higher purpose in mind. Organizing all the world's information is an absolutely audacious, high-level purpose. And that's what motivated me. So here's one of the first points I want to make. And by the way, we can follow the hashtag. I'll program in everything I say, and at the end of the talk, you'll see the outline for this talk come up for you to download as a PDF. So, and I'm at Sanders Says. The first thing I really want to say is that a higher purpose is either your secret sauce or your missing ingredient. It's one or the other, and there is zero gray. So whether you're running a business, whether you're running a family, whether you're running a church, whatever you're doing as a leader, just remember that the higher purpose is either the secret sauce that you win with, whether you're trying to win talent, whether you're trying to win customer loyalty, or it's your missing ingredient. So the whole point of the talk now is about how to get to that. Let's talk about the word purpose, though, because I like purpose a lot because it's not only because it has a P in it phonetically, but it means so much. See, purpose comes from an Anglo-Norman variation on the Latin words purposer, P-U-R-P-O-S-E-R. Per means intent. Poser means put forth. That's what purpose is. Purpose is about being intentional, not sleepwalking in life. So the idea then is, what do you intend to do? Why are you doing this? Stanford professor William Damon said that a higher purpose, and I'm going to read this because I want to, obviously this is the Twitter zone, so I want to get this one exactly right so it's not Googled. Stanford professor William Damon defines a higher purpose as an intention to accomplish something that is at the same time meaningful to the self and consequential for the world, beyond self. So a higher purpose is a purpose that offers the most service to the world. A base purpose then serves what? Self. So that's the idea. Now some people say, well, you know, purpose and mission are the same. Not true. A mission is what you're going to do and for whom. That's classic business idea. Mission is what and for whom, and vision is and what does it look like when we get there, right? That's what a mission vision statement is. That's why so many companies have really crappy mission and vision statements, right? So they say, we are going to make a lot of money for our shareholders, and we're going to look up and it's going to be a $20 stock in 5 years. You think I'm kidding. If you actually Google corporate missions and start to read these comportment-driven missions by the communication department, you will see that there is an absolute profound difference between putting forth an intention to accomplish something that impacts the outside world and having a mission statement. So what I want you to focus on then is your quest statement. How are you going to change the world with your business? How are you going to change the world with your life? How can you measure that? And can you see it? So it gets back to this idea that you've got to move from a base purpose to a higher purpose. And the more you move to the higher purpose, the more energy you have. And I know this from something I've just done. Now, I'll use my new thing that I'm doing now as an example throughout the talk to illustrate how purpose is really driving my company. I've told some of you that I shut down my consulting business. I don't do much speaking anymore, and a partner and I have plowed our entire savings into a startup because I hate raising money. I hate asking for money when you don't have a revenue-producing enterprise. So we have a company called NetMinds. And my motivation for NetMinds is exactly the same as my motivation for quitting Discovery and going to work for Mark Cuban. It's the same idea. My motivation is transparency and access will change the publishing world as we know it. And the higher purpose then is we want to make publishing fair, period. Because anybody in this room that's worked on a book knows that the bureaucracy called corporate publishing and the anarchy called self-publishing are not good enough for us. They are unfair. So we want to change all that because the plumbing in Digital 3.0 has made it absolutely possible for someone to bring to market a valuation machine that can answer the fundamental question, what is my idea worth? And a semantic database that would say, is this freelancer any good? Do we have friends in common? And have they been Yelped? And if you put the two together, you create an ecosystem of opportunity, aka joint venture, just like the old movie studio model, and meritocracy emerges. Because one of the things I've learned from one of our early authors, Nolan Bushnell, is that meritocracy attracts the best and the brightest, but it requires absolute transparency. So anyway, that's an example of a higher purpose. And I'll show you later about how we've been leveraging that concept. We're going to make publishing fair to go against companies that say, we're going to make a lot of money and we're going to pay our employees a lot of money, which is the base purpose. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of having a higher purpose, the practical business benefits. There's basically four I want to talk about. Number one, enthusiasm. Human beings, sentient beings, are compassionate creatures. And when they sense a person's higher purpose, their quest to change the world, it attracts them like moths to a flame. If you've ever tried to win talent, try purpose. It works better than paycheck, especially with the new generations like my 26-year-old. If you want to read a book on this, read Dan Pink's Drive. It is the best written book to help explain that money really doesn't motivate us. Yes, it's a base need. If you don't have any money, you're incredibly motivated to get your money back. That's true. But on a sustainable basis, real enthusiasm comes from a sense of meaning. I am part of something bigger than all of us. In 2002, during the Great Reconstruction, I flew 350,000 miles. So, and you guys that know me know this, is that my job description for that time was written based on Pulp Fiction and the Harvey Keitel character, the wolf. That we needed to have a person who would get on a plane in the middle of the night and fly to Columbus or to Cincinnati or to Beijing or whatever and work on a problem. And I got to tell you, I had unlimited energy. The more I thought about what the internet was going to do to the world, I defended it against the dot-com crash. And it gave us incredible intensity and incredible energy. And Nolan told me, when you look at people like Steve Jobs and you say, what makes him who he is? I said, talent. He says, no, Steve Jobs was not one of the top 10 people that worked at Atari. He said, the best guy that ever worked at Atari was Bill Lee. The second best guy that worked at Atari was Jay Miner. I put Steve 9th or 10th. I said, but dude, Jobs kicked a dent in the universe. He said, that's right, because he had something the other 9 didn't have. Unbridled enthusiasm. And if you can generate that inside yourself and then transfer it to your people, the enthusiasm changes everything. As Liz has taught me, you are a leader when you want to build something that you cannot build alone. So you must be in the business of generating enthusiasm in the people that work with and for you, and you will do that with a sense of higher purpose. The second thing it does is it drives engagement. Now, I'm going to use a few stories to kind of illustrate this because this is kind of cool. Now, one of them is an old story that has been mistold many times that I actually did the work to research where it comes from. You've heard the story of the 3 workers on the scaffold, right? But I want to tell you where it comes from because it's very important. Christopher Wren, W-R-E-N-N, famous architect, England, rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral. Didn't want to be an architect. Did that on the side. He was actually an astronomer. You have to understand that when you're rebuilding a church with brick, it takes about 30 to 40 years. Most people that work on a church don't finish the church in their lifetime at this point in time. So motivation was all he had. And where the story comes from is he was at work, and on a scaffold, he saw 3 people working. And what he saw were 3 different levels of engagement, as we would say in modern speak. He saw a man crouched over as if he hated his life, and he asked that person, what are you doing? And the man looked at him soullessly instead of making a wage. Second person on the scaffold, more upright, seems to be somewhat more motivated. He asked him the same question, to which that person says, I'm building a straight wall. His purpose was a little higher. The third person with a twinkle in his eye when asked the same question said, I'm building a cathedral for the Almighty. And it hit Wren. And Wren wrote about it and talked about it, and Benjamin Franklin heard about it, and he talked about it. And it's been passed down and passed down and passed down, and now you know why. And the story occurs over and over and over again. I'll give you an example. Interface Floor. They make modular carpet. They had a pivot in their purpose in 1994. So when they first started in 1994, they were in the remnants of the quality revolution led by Ed Deming. So their goal at the time, their higher purpose, was to make the highest quality carpet and to have the lowest amount of waste because at the time, waste was a lack of quality, okay? Then Ray Anderson read Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce, and realized he was a criminal, a corporate plunderer that was stealing from future generations. So they pivot, and in 1994, their new mission is called Mission Zero. We will have no impact on the planet by 2020. And they changed everything inside the company, from hiring to comp to process, and they started to ask why behind everything to live on purpose. And that purpose was to not only reduce the environmental impact of the carpet industry, but to influence or bully others to do the same. And it hit all the employees. I'll give you an example of how high level their engagement was. Someone from Dow Chemical, a senior manager, was meeting at Interface, and this is like 1996, and Interface was doing their dog and pony about how they were going to save the world, and carpet's going to be recycled in the future, and all this other stuff. And the senior manager from Dow, she just wasn't having it because she was focused on corporate profit. She thought he was completely distracted, and she excuses herself from the meeting to walk all the way across the distribution center floor to use the restroom. And as she walks, she has to wait for a forklift driver who's driving down a defined path. She notices that the forklift driver is singing at the top of his lungs, looking like he's a kid at an amusement park, having the time of his life, driving a pallet of carpet from here to here 300 times a day. So she stops him, and she says, "Sir, let me ask you something. What are you so happy about?" And he goes, "Don't you know? We're saving the world, ma'am." And he went into the different things they were doing in the DC to reduce impact, quoted her that they were already 18% reduction in electricity against the 25% bogey, interrupts halfway through a sentence and says, excuse me, I don't want to be rude, but if I don't get this pallet of carpet there in about 30 seconds, our waste figures are going to go through the roof. He starts driving, and before he's even away, he's already singing at the top of his lungs again. When the Dow executive went back into the conference room, she told CEO Ray Anderson, whatever it is you've got, I want my people to have this too. I want them to have this kind of love for their job, and that's what you offer with higher purpose. Number 3, purpose will shield you against criticism. What I really wanted to say to the speaker yesterday that says that I was here for 40 grand is I wanted to go up to him after his talk and go, wow, that sucked. Sounded like you phoned it in. They weren't having it. Did you read the hashtag? They killed you. But I didn't. But I wanted to because you know why? People that have a base purpose are vulnerable to self-doubt because it's just about them. It's just about them. And if it's just about them, then all criticism is about them. But when you are on a quest and you're marching to something bigger than all of us, certainly something bigger than making money, when you pick on me, you're picking on the purpose. When you picked on Ray Anderson about his audacious mission to save the world, he would smile at you and not look in the mirror and wonder, am I on the right or wrong track? In fact, I've seen a purpose-driven organization that is galvanized when faced with adversity and criticism instead of split. Final benefit, benefit number 4, it maintains your focus. Because in a business, one of my takeaways I want you to take away is that you've got to have 3 things to succeed. You do these 3 things, you will pummel the world. 1, have a higher purpose. Compete at the purpose level. 2, have passion for the purpose. Get up every day and enthuse about it. 3, have focus. Focus, by the way, is really important. Have you met people that had a higher purpose, they had tons of passion, and they're all over the place, and they don't bust a grape in their entire life? They didn't get the 3rd part right. They lacked focus, okay? And the reason that you get so much more focus is that when you put the purpose in the center of the table, you always know the why behind the what. So at Sharp Healthcare Systems, for example, they defined their purpose as delivering superior patient outcomes to produce health, happiness, and liberty, because they are sequentially in that order. And so every time they would have internal squabbles, every time they would get seduced to some cost-cutting mechanism, every time they'd start to lose their way, their executives would say the following: you can't hate the competitor enough to change the patient outcome in one situation. Get back to work. And that's the benefit for you too. Southwest Airlines, classic example. Southwest Airlines focused their customers on their success and unified their team when Braniff Airlines was trying to kill them. Because Braniff Airlines, when Southwest first came out in 73, I believe, Braniff Airlines says, we are going to create a smoking hole in the ground out at Love Field. And what they meant was we are going to kill Southwest Airlines. And they did every predatory thing you could imagine. But Southwest Airlines had a higher purpose. They were going to democratize the skies. And they were going to make flying friendly, 2 things that did not exist. It was too expensive and it was too cold. And that was their purpose. And that's why people went to work at Southwest Airlines. And they talked about it a lot. And when they chose their stock ticker, it was LUV, and they lived the purpose every day. So Herb Kelleher was empowered then, when faced with Braniff's predatory actions, to take a full page out in the Dallas Morning News and tell the entire city Braniff is trying to kill us. And they're cheating. And they're doing everything they can to kill us so they can serve their shareholders. They don't care about you, but we do. Someone up there loves you. So please, come to Love Field tomorrow and buy tickets to nowhere. Just come buy tickets. You'll take a trip someday. We need your help. Herb. By all estimates, probably 30,000 people mobbed Love Field the next day to buy tickets to nowhere. Because that's what happens when you connect with the human energy of making a difference and marching to a higher purpose. So how do you find yours? That's the transition I want to go to now. How do you find your quest? Because one of the things I want to really point out here is that your purpose doesn't have to be original, but it must be organic. I'm going to say this again, because I've seen people get this wrong and choose a higher purpose that did not fit them, and it just confused people. And they quickly abandoned it, and then people weren't confused anymore. They go, those people are disingenuous, right? The purpose doesn't have to be original, but it must be organic. What do I mean by that? It's got to be in your DNA as an enterprise, right? So when a purpose is organic, I'll use Sam Walton. Now, I know that Walmart has lost their way in terms of purpose, and they've shifted down to shareholder value, and I understand that. But if you roll back the clock, Sam Walton, like myself, grew up in a little town in rural America, and you couldn't get stuff. So he wanted to create a solution for people in rural America to have the same opportunity as people living here in Chicago. That's it. That was his purpose. And it was very organic to his skill set, because his skill set was three things: acquisition of real estate, negotiating pricing for detail and distribution, and communicating everyday low prices, marketing. And they were very organic skills that were in his DNA. They were in the DNA of all of the early folks like Mike Duke, and they took it to market, and it resonated. So what you have to figure out is, where is that intersection between your competencies, your resources, and a greater need you can't stop thinking about? The intersection then is what? Your resources, the greater need, the higher purpose. And when you find that intersection, you have found your purpose. I think a better way to say it might be, you will detect your purpose. There's several books I'm going to recommend at the end of this talk for you to read more on if you're really interested in this topic, and I hope I've made you interested. One of those books, the first one you must read if you haven't already, is Dr. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a wonderful man and a fantastic speaker. And he coined a phrase called logotherapy. And logotherapy is purpose-driven happiness, so to speak. When a person finds their meaning, they have less suffering. When a person finds their meaning, they have more gratitude. Meaning is very important. The reason he survived the war camps was because when he was checked in, they tore up his book he'd taken his life to write and destroyed it in front of him. So he had to live to write and release the book. All of his friends died around him, but he lived, and he learned logotherapy works. Well, here's what he said. He said, if you do good and pay attention, the meaning of life, your meaning of life, will put in an appearance. Your only job is to detect it. I'll say it again. If you do good, meaning will make an appearance. I had that happen to me too. In my personal life as a speaker prior to NetMinds, I would go out and I would speak at conferences and I would write books. And for like the last 6 years, it was a really meaningful job. And the reason why is that one day I was writing an essay about Billy. This is before Today We Are Rich was written. And I was writing an essay about Billy because my literary agent had said I had lost my way a little bit. And she says, you know what the publishers want is they want Love is the Killer app too, and you've pivoted to this and you've pivoted to that, and can't you just write a sequel to Love is the Killer app? And I couldn't get sequel out of my head. I said, I don't want to write a sequel to Love is the Killer app. That was you can't do those things again. But I said, but I'll try to write an essay about my grandmother because I do care about that, and I believe, if anything, it's the prequel. So that's just as good to me. But I'm writing something and I'm talking to our family and I'm trying to put together all the remarkable things that Billy did in her life, not just for me, but for the local community of Clovis. And I was writing out of love, not to make money, not to get a book deal, but because I was just trying to go back to the egg and be the same guy with the sideburns and the yellow sunglasses in 2001 that wrote that book. And as I was writing, it was like I decided, for whatever reason, because she's always like talked about Bible bingo. She goes, when you get lost on something, play Bible bingo. And that's just where you open up the Bible to a random page, any version, and you put, it's like, you know, boom, and you put your finger on any part of the page, and it's your fortune cookie. And I did it that day. Popped it open to Hebrews, put my finger in the middle of a page, looked at it, and I got a gift. And the gift was this. It was and I'll tell you, it's just an adaptation of a scripture. And it went like this. Promote good works and acts of love among men, especially as we gather together in public. And encourage others to do the same. And when I read that, I went, wow, that's my meaning of life for me personally, is to encourage other people to love and to do good works and to encourage them to teach other people to do the same, especially as we gather in public. And it really focused my energy and efforts to write Today We Are Rich about Billy and to speak about it for the last year. And that's what you can do too. You've just got to make yourself available to that. So there is something, a tool that you can use. And if you go to tinyurl.com front slash, let me see, tinyurl.com. Okay, here it is. Purpose tool. Yeah, that's it. I can sleep more. tinyurl.com /purpose tool. One of my good friends, a great author, Nikos, you've got to read his book. It's called Purpose. Markogiannis. He wrote a book called Purpose, and he created a profiler for you to figure out your company's purpose. And what he says is that there are 4 kinds of purpose, basically. 4 kinds of purpose that every company can pursue. No one is necessarily any better than the other, but you got to pick one. The profiler will help you figure out which one it is, how to express it, etc. The 4 kinds of purpose you can pursue are, number 1, discovery. A lot of technology companies and life science companies are driven by discovery, like HP, literally, invent. So the quest for discovery is a purpose. Number 2, quality or excellence, depending on what you want to call it. I call it quality. This gets back to an old story, and if you want to Google this and just read about it later, it'll blow your mind. It's called We Build Good Ships. It's about Newport shipbuilding. Newport shipbuilding started in 1886 with a simple model. We build good ships. We must build good ships, either at a profit or a loss, but we build good ships. And they inspired the entire quality movement. Every high-quality product you have in front of you comes from Newport. And this philosophy, that our central purpose is to build good ships. And they pushed off profit, hopefully at a profit, but we build good ships. And it drove people over and over and over again. Third possible purpose is altruism. Ayn Rand folks, do not come out against me on this one. I'm using the word because that's the word that Nikos uses. You could call it generosity. Altruism. Many great organizations function off that idea. Tom Shoes is a classical example. Tom Shoes wants to make a difference. They coined buy one, give one. Blake is totally driven as a social entrepreneur by altruism. The 4th and final one is heroism. Heroism is we will topple the bad guys. Steve Jobs got tons of energy in early Apple days defining the villains. Another cool thing that Nolan told me, and he's writing a book for us called Finding the Next Steve Jobs. And he said, if you don't know who the asshole is in your industry, you're the asshole. Because every industry has 1 or 2 or 3, and your job as a hero is to destroy them and to replace what they did with a better world. But the hero takes on an audacious goal. And again, it's one of the exercises I put the netminders through, and I said, okay, who's the villain? Who do we dislike, like to their core? Because the Mother Teresa approach to business will fail you every time. That everyone in your industry is a bunch of nice people, and I believe in rainbows, and I believe in unicorns. You will not be a hero. You will be a me too, and you'll frequently copy other people. So we said, okay, who are the villains? Well, there's 2 villains. All the publishers in New York that run a bureaucracy and take away all the autonomy, and all the self-publishing companies that, and I actually dislike them much more, the Lulus, the Smashwords, the Author Solutions, that fundamentally disrespect how hard it is to make a good book. that you cannot design a cover for $500 unless you want 15 books to have the same cover because they're using templates. You don't edit a book for $999. We did net promoter scores on almost 1,000 authors, and the net promoter scores for Lulu and Smashwords were lower than Comcast Cable and Blue Cross and Blue Shield. We interviewed ex-employees at Lulu and Author Solutions, 15 of them. The average time they spend editing your book is 45 minutes. The trick is to edit the first page of every chapter because that's what the author checks, and then spell check the book. It is disrespectful. So on the one hand, the corporate publishers overcharge the author and underdeliver author services. On the other hand, the self-publishers undercharge the author and embarrass them. And they should put a warning label on every book that once you publish a book with an ISBN, the sales figures for that book will determine your advance or being signable for the next book, because that's how publishers do it. If you have a book proposal, they just move it over here, they ignore your platform, and they just look you up on BookScan, and if you sold 1,400 books, then they go, we can't sign you because the floor is not 30,000. So anyway, once we defined the villains, that's how we recruit, which moves me to our last point. How do you leverage all of this? Number one, make it part of the hiring process. So I'm so excited to say we got our first senior UX developer, and we hired him yesterday away from a Fortune 50 company for only 90 grand. Dude, that is so hard, and a pile of stock options. Just saying, or as Sarah Palin likes to say, hashtag just praying. So the way we got him, though, was we invigorated him by giving him 25 self-published books and having him talk to 2 published authors, and he came back and said, I'll take the job. I'm gonna work on something meaningful. And what he's going to do is he's going to build the greatest database in the history of the world based on every acknowledgement and every book published since 1980. And for the first time, we'll know who worked on what and if they suck or not. For the first time, other authors will get to review publishers and talk about whether that editor was responsive, whether the promises they made were true. For the first time ever, freelancers will get to review authors like Tim Ferriss, for example, and talk about what's the experience of working with that guy. And for the first time, he says, we're going to make the world fair. You see what I'm saying? You use this in the hiring process. Timberland does it every time they go for a hire. But never forget, though, that on an ongoing basis, you've got to apply purpose to get more engagement. So Abbott Labs here out of Greater Chicago, they're scientists. They have to motivate their scientists. You know what they do? They take the scientist out of the lab. They go on a field meeting. And for the protease group that works on HIV, they take them right in front of a patient where the outcome is changing the life of the patient, and they talk to the patient. And when the scientist connects with the patient, the purpose fills them back up, and they just can't leave work again. Number 2, make purpose part of every product and process design. Aveda Corporation was started by Horst Reichelbacher because one of his friends died of lung cancer because of hairspray. And then he realized a lot of his friends were dying. And he realized that hairspray was killing the people that did our hair. So he said, I'm going to make products, Aveda, out of plants. And that was the mission of the company. That was the quest. That's what they did. And every time somebody brought them a product, he would say, how did you do this? And he taught his Dominique Consuet, who took over, to do the same thing. That's why they created the bottles that were biodegradable. That's why they created the packaging using recycled material. That's why they made yoga go to full recycle, or they'd pull their advertising and get their 5 best friends to do it too, because they put that in the center of the table. Number 3, leadership. I want you to think of measuring yourself differently. In a great book, The Lean Startup, Eric Ries talks about this idea of success theater. That's where we take vanity metrics. We take the metrics we like. Oh, I got this many uniques. That doesn't mean you're doing well. Ask yourself a better story. How many different people, if you're a leadership, let's say you're a blogger and you write about leadership, you need to ask yourself, how many case studies do I have where my work is making a difference? And you need to collect every piece of that fan feedback. And you need to put that into your annual review folder, and it should be at least half of how you analyze what you did this year. I saw a talk at UCLA that Eric was at, and he also talked about the idea that about every 8 weeks, you need to pull your team into a room and have a pivot or persevere meeting. And he goes, you need to schedule it Because at a startup, if you say the leaders are going into a conference room for a pivot meeting, the engineers start, looking for jobs on dice. You know what I mean? So you do it regularly so they know that every 8 weeks, everybody's going to get in a room and say, do we pivot and do something a little bit different, or do we persevere? And you need to do the same thing with your mission and your purpose. You need to ask yourself over and over again, is it too high? Is it not organic? Is it too low? And you need to review it every single day. Here's my final point. Number 4, marketing. Marriott is doing some sick, cool stuff in rainforest area with how they are generating buy one, give one, thinking about products, thinking about taking all the unused amenities and sending them to places throughout Africa and South America where they desperately need soap to combat disease. And I talked to David Marriott about it, and I was just like, man, I had tears in my eyes. I said, I can't find that anywhere on your marketing. He goes, well, we don't like to talk about it. We don't want to be accused of greenwashing or anything. And I said, you asshole. Don't you think your housekeepers deserve meaning in their life when they gather up the amenities on this memo? Don't you think the front desk clerk deserves to have a higher purpose in his life, that every time he's nice to someone and they come back, it makes a profound difference to someone in the rainforest area that are depleted? I said, you distribute happiness. And I quoted to him what I'll quote to you, Helen Keller. True happiness comes not from self-gratification, but by defined focus on a purpose, a definite purpose. So what's yours? Spread the love. Give everybody in your life meaning and purpose. It will change the world. The last thing I just want to say, and then we're going to go into this exercise, and this is not for the Twitter zone. I want to say something very private to you. So seriously, I want to talk a little bit about a very personal story in my family life going on right now around purpose, where I am seeing firsthand how purpose gives a person meaning, and it gives a person intense energy. Many of you that work with me on Today We Are Rich know I had this wonderful kid named Frisco who did all of the marketing for us. And he probably contacted a lot of you and worked with a lot of you, and he was such a good kid. And I used to think, because that kid's lazy, and he works 2 hours, and then he's all tired, and he's like, I'm going to say. Anyway, he doesn't have insurance. He finally got a job about a month and a half ago where he had real insurance. He went to a doctor. They found some lumps. He has 4th stage Hodgkin's, 25-year-old kid. And he's going to fight for his life for the next 6 months. And my wife and I were out to dinner with him, and he's been a friend of ours forever because he was Anthony's best friend, has been, since we lived in the Silicon Valley. And we talked about what was going on in his life. And he goes, I've got to get a new place to live, but I'm screwed. He goes, because I've only got $600, which means I've got to do like somebody's bedroom. And he goes, but if I tell them what I'm going through, there's no way they're going to rent to me. And so my wife looked at me, and I looked at her, and I just thought of what Leo Buscaglia wrote in his book, Love. The only reason to be the greatest or to have something is to give it away. And I told my wife, I said, we're going to take Frisco in. He's going to live with us. He's going to live with us, and we're going to take time off work, and we're going to be with him. And you think about that, and you talk to your friends, and they go, wow, that's a horrible thing. No, it isn't. It's an opportunity. It was a gift. And it's an opportunity, just like I talked about in Today We Are Rich, to do something very meaningful with all this materialism, all this stuff that we accumulate. And the reason I say it's not something I want you to tweet, and this isn't part of my talk, but I just want to make you aware of this in social media, is that Frisco looked at us at dinner the other night, and he goes, I don't want to have cancer on Facebook. And I thought about all the people out in the world that have all their life struggles on social media in a very public way. And I think a lot about, I hope to see startups in the future that can give people back their privacy. I think privatists are the new publicists. And I hope that someone in this room is inspired to help people like Frisco create a smaller circle. Let's do the exercise now. And I want to challenge every one of you to detect, define, claim, implement, and then celebrate. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Tim. Tim Sanders, everybody. Wow.